What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video, and today we're going to be taking a look at this Orzhov midrange deck for the modern format. It's a deck that kind of came into existence about a few weeks ago, really before the start of the regional championship season. Players kind of argued whether it was a deck that was here to stay, if it was just a flash in the pan, whatever was going on. And when we had the first set of regional champions show up in Prague, Ottawa, and I believe in South America as well, it actually took second place in the Ottawa regional championship and performed very well, having a pretty good conversion rate into day 2, while also having a kind of healthy metagame size in day 1. And like I said, they didn't really top 8 at Prague, but they did perform very well there. So I think the Orzhov midrange deck, at least as the modern format stands right now, is a deck that's here to stay. It's got a lot of cool things going on and some really cool synergies in the deck that just allow it to eke out as much advantage as possible to just kind of put the game away from your opponent and also disrupt them enough to where you can kind of get some lock pieces in there and really just kind of control and take over the game. But before we get too deep into the Orzhov midrange deck and we talk about what is actually going on in this deck, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me where we talk mainly about the competitive, modern, and standard formats, as well as some other longer form videos. So if that interests you, please consider subscribing and ringing that notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. It's a very easy way to support me and my content. And while you're down there subscribing to the channel, go ahead and check out the description as well. We have a few links down there. One goes to my Discord server. You can go ahead and follow that link and join over there, as well as following me on Twitch over at twitch.tv/Crawdaddy23, where we've been streaming a lot of modern here lately. I know when Aether Drift fully gets released on Arena, I definitely want to be drafting the format. I've watched a few draft videos and the format looks like it's a lot of fun. I really love the speed mechanic and everything about Aether Drift. So definitely, if you want to be in the loop for that sort of thing as well, be sure to follow me over on Twitch. Also go over to the Casual Spikes podcast YouTube channel, where me and my co-host Randy over at MTG with Randy talk a lot about the competitive formats of Magic the Gathering. We kind of do metagame breakdowns, kind of just see where the meta's at, where things are kind of trending, what's good, how to beat those certain things, talking about a lot of the major tournaments, Pro Tours, World Championships, etc. So definitely a lot of fun over there. We definitely go pretty in depth, and again, it's something that we just have a lot of fun doing. So go ahead and check out that channel over there. Lastly, I want to thank the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders. Manatraders is a monthly subscription service where you can go and rent cards from them and participate in various Magic Online tournaments, such as leagues and even the preliminaries and challenges that they have on the website, including on Manatraders' official website. You can actually play in their tournament series, where they have a different tournament going on every single month that you can qualify for their invitational tournament at the end of the year to win some cash prizes. So definitely make sure to check out Manatraders. Use my code in the description down below to get 5% off your monthly subscription. With all that said, let's go ahead and take a look at this Orzhov midrange deck. So this, like I said, it was probably maybe a few weeks to a month ago, this deck kind of started popping up on Magic Online. It was performing very well. It was putting up pretty good results in challenges, and the big question going into the modern regional championship season was how well is this deck going to perform in paper, and it's going to be a little bit wider of a metagame. You hear from people that, like, sure, there's like one or two of like certain decks that kind of show up in like these modern 64 challenges, 32 challenges, whatever, but when you get into a paper metagame, there's obviously a little bit more dexterity going to it. You're not going to be told of all your triggers, whatever. And I think that this deck, I don't know if it's necessarily like trigger intensive, but there's definitely a lot of moving pieces to kind of keep track of to play this deck optimally. So a lot of this deck is centered around its creatures. Aether Vial seems to be a card that a lot of these decks are not sure if this is good or not with it, but usually in these like creature-esque style decks, we see it in like Merfolk and Goblins, and even like Humans when it was a deck that was, pretty good in the modern format. Aether Vial was kind of a key piece of that deck. Now there is some cool synergies here, obviously getting to have, powerful creatures that have very powerful ETBs and getting to play them at instant speed. Heck, not even have to put them on the stack to get around some of the other decks that maybe you're playing some form of counterspell. Aether Vial is a really good option for it, but like I said, it seems controversial, even though I would say by just nature, if you've played at Modern for a while, that having a creature deck like this and not having Aether Vial would just seem kind of weird. So I think Aether Vial is just kind of married to this kind of archetype, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who you are. And before we even get into the creatures too, there's like 8 other spells in this deck. We have 4 Fatal Push and 4 Ephemerate. Ephemerate being the interesting one because it's going to have a few good synergies with a lot of the things going on here. So Ephemerate for 1 white, you exile target creature you control, and then return to the battlefield under its owner's control. So you essentially just blink it, and it has rebound. So when you cast the spell from your hand, you exile it as it resolves, and at the beginning of your next upkeep, you may cast it from exile without paying its mana cost. So this allows you to double and triple up on some ETB triggers here. So you're looking to abuse things with like Ephemerate plus Phalia, Exuberant, Shepherd. So this being a 2-mana 2/2 flash creature that whenever it attacks, you exile up to another target non-land permanent. So it could be yours, could be your opponent's. And at the beginning of the next end step, you return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it entered under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on Phalia. So this is a creature that if you need to get blockers out of the way, you can just use Phalia to attack and exile them, and then they're not going to be coming back until the end step, which can make things, again, pretty awkward for your opponent when this deck really wants to get in the red zone and attack. It can also just blink some of your own creatures and get some pretty powerful ETB triggers. And we see things like Phantom of the White Orchid here, a 2-mana 2/2 flying first strike creature that whenever it enters the battlefield, disrupts target 1 non-basic land. Its controller searches library for a basic land, puts it on the battlefield, tap, and then shuffled. This is something that you really want against like the Eldrazi decks that are playing all of these lands that end up tapping for 2 mana to play their powerful Eldrazi spells. Getting to play this and then getting to blink it with something like Ephemerate or Phalia, they're eventually going to run out of they're going to run out of basic lands or run out of non-basic lands on the battlefield. So then you're just going to be able to disrupt them even further from executing their game plan, which is really what this white-black deck wants to do, is definitely slow your opponent down and then kind of flood the board with these creatures. And, while they're taking 4, 6, 8, 10 damage a turn, they're having to navigate some of these hate pieces on top of just, again, being further disruptive and being able to having the playoff curve here. So Phantom of the White Orchid, pretty neat card here. We have 1 Aven Interrupter. This is the counterspell creature from the Outlaws of Thunder Junction set. I don't know why. It's like the only symbol with a cowboy hat. I don't know what the heck I was thinking. But 3-mana 2/2 flying flash creature that when it enters the battlefield, you exile target spell and it becomes plotted. Spells your opponents cast from graveyards or from exile cost 2 more to cast. And I think the big thing there is going to be from graveyards. Obviously, with Aven Interrupter plotting something, your opponent can play for free, but with Aven Interrupter in play, they have to pay 2 more for it. And the fact that they're casting cards in the graveyard definitely disrupts the various breach style decks that we see that are trying to cast spells from the graveyard repeatedly. Is going to make them have to pay 2 more to cast them, so they're not able to actually loop their Mox Opals. I don't know how to say Mishra's Baubles, but they can't loop their Mox Opals to float a bunch of mana and, of course, eventually get to their Thassa's Oracle and win the game. So they have to get Aven Interrupter off the battlefield first before they can start doing their loop, which is a pretty neat card, or a pretty neat effect on top of just being a card that you can play to disrupt your opponent. They tap out for like a huge thing. You end up Aven Interrupting it. Sure, they're going to be able to cast it the next turn, but they're going to have to pay some mana into it as well, and can make double spelling very awkward. Bogart Trawler is a land that you can pay 3 life to have come into play untapped, or when it enters the battlefield, exile target player's graveyard. Simple. It's a really good card to have. Again, it's a land when you need it to, and it ends up being a fairly aggressive creature, being a 3/1 for 3 that is also going to get rid of your opponent's graveyard, which can disrupt some of the various graveyard decks in the format. We see cards like Flicker Wisp, that when they come into play, they remove another target permanent from the game and return to the battlefield under its owner's control at the end of turn. So this is like a creature that, with Aether Vial, it can be pretty interesting. You just flicker out like one of your opponent's things on like their end step, then you get to untap, and it's not going to come back until like your end step. So it's definitely, under control at the end of turn. So you can definitely cause some shenanigans, I would say, with something like this. It also works very well with the 2 other creatures, or the 2 other cards in this deck that work very well with the other Ephemerate stuff going on. So we'll get to Overlord of the Bailmark, because this is one of the better cards to be blinking. So you can impend it for 2 mana, 1 and a black, or you can cast it for 5 mana, so 5 mana, 5/5. Whenever Bailmark enters or attacks, you mill 4 cards, you return target a non-avatar creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. So you don't actually target the thing. So as long as you get the trigger, you're going to be able to get something back unless someone is exiling your graveyard. So you can play this like on, turn 3. You flash in a Phalia, untap, play the Overlord, mill your 4 cards, get one of your creatures back. You can attack with a Phalia and then blink the Overlord. And then when it comes back, you're going to get a counter on your Failure. And then the Balemark is going to be a 5/5 creature rather than just an enchantment sitting on the battlefield waiting for those impending counters to come off. It's not necessarily going to work with Ephemerate because you have to exile a creature, but you can protect it with Ephemerate and those kind of effects. Solitude just being a card where you exile a white card from your hand to have it come into play, and Swords to Plowshare or something. If you end up Ephemerating a Solitude, then you will actually get to keep the Solitude around while also getting to double up on the Swords to Plowshare effect there. So ends up being really good. Having a 3/2 lifelink creature around is going to help bolster your life total. It's going to be able to block and trade, or at least get very aggressive, after you kind of clear the way of your opponent's board. I mean, you get to exile their two best things, and then again, just slowly chip away at their life total while padding your own is really sweet. Witch Enchanter is another creature that you can play, and it enters the battle, a land that you can pay 3 life to have it come into play untap. Or on the front side, it's a 4-mana 2/2 that when it enters, you destroy target artifact or enchantment opponent controls. Again, this is something that you can flash in, or with Aether Vial, you can end up doing some pretty cool things with. On top of Failure, I believe this is an online permanent. Well, that's not as cool. Literally in the mind, I'm thinking you could exile your land. This is going to come in the front, but there is something worthwhile about it. Is if your opponent does try to exile your lands and they end up coming back, there are some cards from the Mono Blue Belcher deck that if they are spells on their front and they're not creature spells, then you can actually exile them and then they come back and they don't get to do anything. So that can be pretty sweet there. Lastly, we have this card, Recruiter the Guard. This is a card that was originally printed in, I believe, Conspiracy 2, Take the Crown, and was reprinted in Modern Horizons 3, and was a pretty neat card. We have Recruiter, or we have a different Recruiter. I can't remember its name, but Recruiter the Guard allows you to search your library for a creature with toughness 2 or less. You reveal it and then put it to your hand, then shuffle. So if you probably noticed, a lot of these cards have toughness 2 or less, obviously aside from Overlord of the Balemark, but Witch Enchanter 2/2, Skyclave Apparition 2/2, Recruiter the Guard's a 1/1, so you could go and just get more Recruiter of the Guards. Flicker Wisp 1 toughness, Bogart Trawler 1 toughness, Aven Interrupter 2, Phantom 2, Failure 2, and Emperor of Bones, which is a card I've kind of neglected to talk about, because this is a card that is being in combat on your turn. You can exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard, and then when you adapt it, you can put the card into play with Emperor Bones, exile with Emperor Bones with a finality counter on it and gains haste, and you sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. I believe the finality counter just cares about it dying, not necessarily leaving the battlefield. I am not 100% sure on it, but if you're able to put something into play with Emperor Bones, then you can use Failure to then exile it and then bring it back, and it's going to lose the finality counter. You can also do this to reset Emperor Bones, so you're able to eat something out of the graveyard, pay 2 mana to adapt to attack with your 4/4, and then Failure can then just exile it. You end up getting the creature, with Ephemerate stuff, and just kind of keep this engine going where you're cheating these things into play, but not necessarily cheating them into play, and then having ways to just exile them and bring them back, and you basically cheat the cheap cost of putting it into play, if that makes any sense. And all these things kind of add up, again, just to be very disruptive to your opponent and make it very hard for them to really get anything going while you're slowly just adding more pressure to the board. Land base, there's 22 total lands between all the MDFCs and the 17 actual lands. So you have Flagstones of Trocare, that when it's put in the graveyard from the battlefield, you search your library for a Plains card, you put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library, so you can just play multiple Flagstones and then Legend Rule them and go and do your thing. 3 Flooded Strand, 2 Godless Shrines, 4 Marsh Flats, 3 Plains, 2 Shadowy Backstreet, so the white-black Surveil land, and 1 basic Swamp. On the sideboard, there's Deafening Silence as Grafdigger's Cage, March of the Otherworldly Light, Surgical Extraction, which seems to be the graveyard hate of choice for a lot of decks, Thoughtseize, 2 Phantom of the White Orchid, for White Orchid Phantom to go up to 4 total copies, 3 Wrath of Skies, which seems to be an increasingly more played sideboard card as we kind of get farther into this format, Aven Interrupter, and Skyclave Apparition to round out the sideboard. And that is the Orzhov Midrange deck in a nutshell. It is a very sweet kind of creature control deck, and I think this is something that players really like to kind of go towards. I mean, honestly, this deck looks like it's a lot of fun. I just wouldn't want to be in charge of necessarily playing it and having to play it the most optimal, because that's where you're going to get a lot of your wins, is again, like your sequencing being on point, having the most optimal turn possible to ensure that you slow down your opponent while also getting the most value out of your plays to then eventually just kind of squeeze them out of really any opportunity of coming back into the game. And that's the big thing. And really what people need to remember for a lot of these powerful formats, that it's not enough to just have disruption. You also have to present a clock to your opponent, and not just like, oh, I'm going to win over 20 turns. No, it needs to be a clock that can end the game as soon as possible. Now, I've seen versions of this deck that can like combo off and win on turn 3, but it's not necessarily the norm, and it's not a style that I would expect to see over the next, I would say, few weeks, maybe even by the regional championship in the regional championship somewhere in Charlotte, because that was hard to remember for some reason. But that's the things that you kind of have to keep in mind when preparing for Charlotte in about a month, is that could happen. But I think the norm is just going to be this mid-range, this white-black mid-range strategy that we see, rather than the more combo-focused and mid-range strategy. But, let me know what you think in the comments down below of this Orzhov mid-range deck. I would really like to hear your thoughts and opinions. I thought that this deck was just going to kind of be pretty gimmicky, all things considered, but it has definitely proven me wrong, and it has proven to be a very powerful deck. And as long as we don't see any major shifts and changes for how people attack the modern format, this deck is going to continue to be a very good deck that you can definitely put time into, you can definitely invest into, and learn some of the more the other ins and outs and other intricate things kind of going on. So in that way, again, you can maximize those turns and hopefully put your opponent well out of range to come back and win any games. But that's gonna do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like on the video, comment down below what you think about the Orzhov mid-range deck, subscribe to the channel, check out the description, all that fun stuff. And yeah, that's gonna do it for me. Hope you all enjoyed it. I hope to see you all in the next one.